This is Rome, Italy, and behind me, the famous Roman Colosseum. When I think of Italy, I think Rome, and when I think of Rome, I think Colosseum. But it turns out there's a lot more to Italy than just Rome and the Colosseum. Let's find out what some of those things are. Day 8. Our first day in Italy. Every one of us slept well in the beautiful bed and breakfast in Cuneo, Italy. We woke up to a cool, cloudy morning, something very different from what we had yet experienced on the trip. It was refreshing though, and so was the breakfast. We then headed towards Turin, where we planned to locate a laundromat. We found one, and although it was the most pricey laundry day ever, it got the job done. Apparently it's okay to park on the street in Italy as long as you're coming back to your car before the cops get there. We then decided to visit a cinema museum. We were taken through a brief history of film. Although it was all very interesting, the best part was the elevator ride to the top of the huge building, where we were able to get a great panoramic view of the city of Turin. What do you think of this panoramic view?
Cool.
After lunch outside the museum, it was off to Novara, a town outside of Milan, where we had booked our next hotel. But what would a trip to Europe be without being able to say that you saw the Alps, right? So we stopped beside the road to take a few pictures before heading the rest of the way to the hotel. What do you think of the Alps?
Nice.
Day 9. Not too many exciting things happened on day 9. I mean, it was exciting because, well, we were in Italy. But it was basically just a lot of driving from our hotel in Novara to our hotel in Dolo. The highlight of the day was definitely the picnic.
I asked if we could have a picnic today, and they said yes.
Mom, what did you think of the picnic lunch?
Fabulous.
We stopped at a grocery store and loaded up the Volkswagen and found a beautiful spot to sit down and eat our food beside a peaceful lake. Then it was off to Dolo because dudes only live once. Dolo was the first place we got to try authentic Italian gelato, but it definitely wouldn't be the last. Day 10. Venice. The city we had all heard of. The city we learned about in school. The city that has water for streets instead of pavement. Well, day 10 would be the day we find out if Venice really is the bride of the sea. We bought train tickets and took a train right from Dolo to Venice. We had done a bit of research about what all you can do in Venice, but we hadn't booked anything in advance, so we were basically figuring it out as we went along. It took quite some time to decide on what to do.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure where it is.
Things take long in Venice.
How about you, Kara?
It's hot and I want a gondola ride and I want to fall in.
We finally figured it out though, and we got on a crowded boat that took us to the other side of the island via the Grand Canal. After taking in the incredible sights and sounds of St. Mark's Square, we took a much-needed lunch break in an air-conditioned restaurant. Rolling on a scale of 1 to 10, how refreshing is this place?
10.
After lunch, we got a guided tour of St. Mark's Basilica. Paola was our tour guide, and although she was a little difficult to understand at times, she was very knowledgeable. We enjoyed the tour, and the golden ceilings and beautiful works of art we saw were breathtaking. After walking down more of the narrow streets of Venice and watching other people get gondola rides, we decided it was time for a ride of our own. Hey Roland, what are we on? What are we on? Gondola ride on the Grand Canal in Venice. Oh yeah. Our gondolier, David, took us through some peaceful canals as well as some canals that were packed full of other gondolas. In my opinion, the experience was definitely worth the money, although that might be because I didn't have to pay for it, but I'm sure if you'd ask Dad he would say the same thing. After the gondola ride, we toured Doge's Palace, a building full of huge rooms full of huge paintings. The most interesting part of Doge's palace was walking across the Bridge of Sighs that connects the palace to a prison. We tried to imagine what the prisoners felt years ago as they would walk across the bridge knowing it was their last look at the outside world. Then, some of us went and ruined the moment by taking a Bridge of Sighs selfie. After touring the palace, we ate Italian food at a small restaurant along one of the busy streets of Venice. In the evening, we sat beside the Grand Canal and watched the day slowly turn into night before taking the train back to Dolo. Day 11. We packed up our stuff and headed for Florence, or as the Italians say, Firenze, home of the famous painter and architect Michelangelo. After parking the van and locating a tourist center, we headed for the streets of Florence, armed with a map of the city ready to be tourists. It didn't take us long to discover that Florence is full of beautiful architecture. The first building we got to experience was called the Cathedral of St. Mary of the Flowers. It was a beautiful church, with arches, marble floors, and a large dome with a huge mural painted on the ceiling. Outside the church, we waited in line in the hot sun to climb an old bell tower for a better view of the city. 414 steps, no lift. That's an elevator. After waiting in line for about a half hour in the hot sun, we discovered that this place didn't accept credit cards, and Dad didn't have enough cash. Although we were very disappointed, we didn't let it ruin our day. We did make it back to the tower after hitting an ATM and touring a Leonardo da Vinci museum, both of which were very interesting. Although we had to wait in line another half an hour, the view from the bell tower was actually worth it. Florence is even more impressive from way up high than it is from street level.
There you are. I was looking all over for you.
I was too.
Welcome to the top of the bell tower. Welcome to the top of the bell tower.
Thanks.
You know, the crazy thing about being up here is when you look down at the people, they look like ants.
We considered getting a tour of Michelangelo's museum where the famous sculpture of David is kept, but decided against it when we combined our rising levels of exhaustion with having to wait in yet another long line. One thing we had learned by this point is that you just can't see everything there is to see in Europe in only 2 weeks. After a pit stop at the hotel, we drove to Michelangelo Square, where we had a supper and a beautiful view of the city at dusk at pretty much the same time. Then it was back to our hotel where we had no trouble falling asleep. Day 12. After breakfast at our hotel in Florence, we got back in the trusty Volkswagen and headed to Pisa. Everyone has heard of Pisa because of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And while I'm sure there's a lot more to see in Pisa than just the tower, we decided to be stereotypical tourists and just visit the tower and its surrounding buildings. After parking the van, we got started on being tourists right away. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is just a fun thing to take pictures with. Almost as fun as watching hundreds of other tourists trying to get the perfect picture of themselves holding up the tower or pushing it over. Many people try, but very few people truly master the art of the perfect picture with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Climbing the tower would have to wait, however. We first toured the cathedral and baptistry that are on the same grounds as the tower. In the baptistry, a professional singer showed us the amazing acoustics. Next, we headed up the famous tower. Climbing up the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
The crazy thing about being way up on this tower is the little people down there, they look like ants.
After a few minutes of enjoying a great view of Pisa, we headed back down the tower and back to our van. We then headed to our hotel in Livorno, dropped off our stuff, and went for a drive along the sea.
We have Dan and Killeen on the beach. Here's Mom on the beach and Kara on the beach. Roland reading on the beach. Here I am on the beach.
And here is the tower that we just made on the beach.
Then, we had supper at a pizzeria before heading back to our hotel. Day 13. We left our hotel in Livorno, at which we had our own personal parking garage, and headed to Rome. It was a long drive along the west coast of Italy. After a lot of driving, a picnic lunch, and then a lot more driving, we finally got to our hotel in Rome, where we stayed for the last 3 nights of our trip. Our hotel was within walking distance of the Vatican City, so we decided to walk around the city's walls and see what it was like. We also decided to get some authentic Roman ice cream.
Where are we from?
Yeah.
Canada.
Canadian. First time in Rome?
Yes.
You like Rome?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Seeing St. Peter's Square at night was pretty awesome.
What do you think, Kara?
I think that's where the Pope comes, see the balcony where the Pope comes out, or one of those.
Being able to say we walked around an entire country in one day was fun too. We walked back to our hotel to get some rest for the next 2 days, which we would spend touring Rome. Day 14. Our second last full day in Europe, and the first of 2 Rome days. We started out our day by walking from our hotel to the nearest metro station. From that station, we were able to ride to the stop known as Colosseo, which features, you guessed it, the famous Roman Colosseum.
There it is. First glimpse of the Roman Colosseum.
The day was a little dreary, but that didn't dampen our spirits. What was amazing to me was how the many vendors that roamed the streets of Rome put away their selfie sticks and sunglasses and whipped out their umbrellas and ponchos. Where they kept them while it was sunny, I'll never know. While we were outside the Colosseum, someone approached us and offered an English guided tour of the Colosseum. It seemed like a reasonable deal, so we went for it. The deal also included a guided tour of the Palatine Hill, which we wouldn't regret in the least. The tour of the Colosseum was amazing. Our tour guide was very knowledgeable and gave us lots of interesting information and stories as we walked around the Colosseum.
25 different kinds of gladiators. Each type of gladiator had its own specific type of armory.
It became almost easy to picture the incredible and terrible events that took place in that very building centuries ago. After taking in as much as we could of the nearly 2,000-year-old building, we headed outside to meet a man named Chad, who would give us the tour of the Palatine Hill. We could tell right away that Chad loved his job, and was passionate about history. As he took us through the ruins of what was once a huge palace, he stopped every now and then to tell us stories.
This actually starts in 1799 with Napoleon. Napoleon brings the French here. The French are very skeptical.
After the tour was over, we stayed and talked with him some more. Well, Rollin talked with him. The rest of us mostly listened. I think Chad was happy to have someone to discuss history and philosophy with. But yeah, if you ever go to Rome and need a tour of the Palatine Hill, make sure you get Chad. After a quick stop in the Palatine Hill Museum, we ate lunch. We spent the rest of the afternoon riding on one of Rome's city bus tours.
How do you like riding right at the front of the bus?
It's good except it's sunny.
We got off at a few places to look at Roman architecture. We also took in a time travel motion simulator thing that took us through the history of the life of the famous artist Michelangelo. We then ate supper at an Indian restaurant where we met Hussein, possibly the best waiter ever, before riding the subway back to our hotel. Day 15. We started our last full day in Europe by walking from our hotel to the Vatican Museum entrance, where we had to wait a while to get in.
And we are walking to the Vatican. We're here standing outside the Vatican Museum, getting ready for our tour, getting hydrated before a big tour. How many more minutes, Dad?
I think it's about 6 more. We should be able to crank her in there.
Yeah, it's like another half hour till it starts.
Anyone excited?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Kara and her big water.
We had purchased a private tour for just our family, so we were looking forward to that experience. Our tour guide, Simona, did not disappoint. She took us through room after room of, well, people, but more importantly, beautiful art. We saw amazing paintings, sculptures, floors and ceilings, walls. It was all very incredible, and Simona did a great job of explaining things and answering our questions. We finished the tour by walking through the Sistine Chapel. The chapel was beautiful, and while the masses of people and the guards constantly saying, "Silencio, silence please," were a little distracting, it was still a great experience. We were grateful that our tour guide had walked us through each section of the ceiling before, so that we knew what to expect and what the painting signified. Then we headed to St. Peter's Basilica. We walked through the huge building and admired the beautiful architecture. It felt like we could have spent hours just staring at it. After seeing the inside and taking some pictures of St. Peter's Square, we walked along the streets of Rome looking for a place to eat supper. We found one and enjoyed the last pasta together.
You have a place for 6?
How's the last pasta?
What is it?
It's fabulous.
Thank you.
And that's it. The next day we flew home, and so ended the most epic trip ever. But before we end this thing, let's take a look at the top 3 highlights of Italy. Number 3. Our flight home. Now you're probably thinking, what kind of trip is the flight home one of the highlights? But just let me explain. So we were originally planning on flying from Rome to Venice, and then from Venice to Toronto. But when we got to the airport in Rome, the person behind the counter told us that there was a direct flight from Rome to Toronto that left a little later than our other flight was going to, but it actually got to Toronto a little bit earlier. And so we thought, sure, why not? We accepted the tickets, and it wasn't until we got on the plane that we realized that our tickets were for business class, first class. And we saw our seats, and they reclined, we had lots of leg room. It was just so much nicer to be able to end the trip relaxing and leaning back for only 8 hours, instead of being with no leg room spread over 2 flights for like 11 hours. Number 2. Our tour with Chad.
His name was Chad. He took us around the palace, or what used to be Caesar's palace in Rome, and had a lot of history for us. Talked about how the Republic rose and how most of Rome's conquest was done because of the Republic, not because of Imperial Rome, which was a new thought to me. It was really, really interesting. As he talked, and we moved up into the hill where the palace was, and he was telling us lots of stories from history and tying it all together. And as he was doing this, I'm like, man, this sounds a lot like The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton. And at the end of the tour, I had a chance to ask him about that. He said that, yeah, he admitted he was using a lot of the stuff from Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man, so I was pretty proud that I had caught him on that.
And number 1, the whole trip. That's right, the whole trip was highlight number 1, because the whole trip was just that awesome. Everything worked out really well, we learned lots, it was lots of fun, and it was just overall a great experience. So shout out to Dad for taking us on the trip, shout out to the rest of my family for making it so much fun, and a shout out to Rome for being so old and historical, and a shout out to the Tower of Pisa for doing such a great job of leaning. And last but not least, shout out to you for watching.